This video is all about social power, what it is and how it's used. I'm going to use examples of various ways power might be used in a work environment, like an office. The way we're going to define power here is the power of person A to get person B to do something person B wouldn't ordinarily do. So let's use the example of you being person B and person A is your manager at work, your boss. Your boss wants you to be the person who takes the office garbage out to the bin every day. Now that should be the cleaner's job, but your boss fired the cleaner, so now you've been asked to do it. And taking the trash out is not something many of us enjoy, so let's say that you're one of those people who doesn't enjoy taking the trash out, and maybe you didn't think that was in your job description, and it's not something you'd ordinarily do for someone else. So that's where your boss needs to have power over you to get you to take the trash out. Before we start, we just need to identify the different types of power. There's force, persuasion, authority, and manipulation. Now, don't worry about force and persuasion and manipulation. We're not going to look at those. What we're going to look at is authority. And we're going to use the work of the social psychologists John French and Bertram Raven, who studied systems of authority in the 1950s and 60s. Their work remains pretty influential today. They developed a taxonomy of authoritative power that can help us understand how authority works and the implications of using particular forms of authority. And they distinguish 6 forms of authoritative power. These are coercive, induced, legitimate, competent, personal, sometimes called referent, and informational. Now let's start off with coercive authority. This is authority based on punishment. So your boss tells you that if you don't take the trash out, you'll have to work late on a Friday. The main goal here for your boss is that you comply with their request. The problem with this form of power is that it requires surveillance. Your boss will need to carefully monitor you to ensure that you're taking the trash out every day and that you don't skip a day or just hide the trash or get someone else to take the trash out for you. So they're going to have to keep an eye on you. And this type of authority typically is responded to by the worker with a calculative response. You'll do as you're told, but you'll try and find a way of doing the minimum required to be seen as complying. Also, if the coercion is too strong, you may accuse your boss of bullying you and file a complaint against them. So it's a risky form of authority for your boss to use. The next form of authority is induced authority. This is similar to coercion, but involves offering a reward. Your boss says that you'll be allowed to leave work early on a Friday if you take the trash out each day. It's got the same problem as coercive authority in that it requires your boss to maintain surveillance to ensure that you actually are taking the trash out every day and you are likely to be calculative, making sure you look compliant whilst exerting the minimum amount of effort to do so. The other issue here is if your boss finds that they can no longer offer the reward, say work becomes very busy and they can't let anyone leave early on a Friday, they lose their authority. Next, we have legitimate authority. This is where your boss asks you to take out the trash and you do so because you know it's your boss, so it's legitimate for them to ask you to do this thing. That's their job. Your boss is less likely to have to keep you under surveillance with this type of authority because there's no system of reward or punishment to keep to. The problem is that this type of power is unpredictable and unstable because it depends on your boss being in their role. If your boss loses their position of being your boss, their authority instantly disappears and they can no longer tell you what to do. Also, the scope of the authority is limited. If taking out the trash is not your job, you might decide they can't tell you to do it. It's not a legitimate request. I'll give you an example to help you think about this. So think of someone in the fire brigade. If they tell you to stay away from a burning building, you're likely to comply. But if they ask you to act with greater courtesy towards the people around you, well, maybe you'll tell them to get stuffed. It's not their job. What's also interesting with this type of power is that it shifts due to social norms. Right now, all sorts of authority structures are becoming unsettled, so that we might have ascribed authority to our bank manager maybe a decade or more ago, but these days, nope, they don't have any authority over us at all. In fact, we kind of ignore them, and we don't much like them. Apologies if you're a bank manager. Now, let's look at competent authority, sometimes known as expert authority. Here, you take out the trash because your boss is really competent as a manager. You see them as knowledgeable and skilled. So when your boss asks you to take out the trash, you think to yourself, well, my boss must have a good reason why they need me to do this, because they know what they're doing. They're good at their job. So yep, I'll do it. The problem here is that if your boss makes a few mistakes, you may see them as less competent, and this means they lose their authority over you. You start to question their competence. Also, we're living at a time where expertise is becoming more and more diffuse. The experts used to be the scientists, the doctors, and more generally the professional classes. But their expertise is increasingly being questioned, and as such, they're losing their authority because that is where most of their authority came from. It came from competent or expert authority. Okay, next we have personal authority, sometimes called referent authority. This is where you just really like your boss. Maybe they're very charismatic. Maybe they just come across as a really nice person. You find them attractive and you want to please them. So your boss wants you to take out the bins. You think, sure, if it makes my boss happy, I'll do it. I'll do it because I like them and I want them to like me. But the problem here is that this form of authority, personal authority, takes a long time to develop, and it can make things difficult when it comes to asking someone to do something they really don't want to do. Is you start to think that maybe your boss is not such a nice person after all because they're asking you to do this horrible thing. Yeah, there's limits to what people will do just because they like you. Also, this authority disappears when you find the boss loses their attractiveness. Say you see how they act when they're drunk at a staff party. Finally, we have informational power. This is where your boss denies you access to some key information unless you take the bins out. And this is a new form of power that has particular relevance for the era we live in just now, which is sometimes referred to as the information age. So having control over information that others need or want puts you in a position of power. Having access to, say, confidential financial reports, being aware of future changes happening in the workplace, or even knowing where your team is going for its annual work away day. All of these are examples of informational power. So your boss says that if you take the bins out, they'll keep you in the loop when it comes to things coming down the pipeline from the head office. You know, you'll be the first to know kind of thing. The problem here is that information is becoming more and more difficult to control, so this power is somewhat limited. Most organizations are leaky when it comes to information, and it's really hard to control who gets access to what information and when. So those are the 6 forms of authoritative power mapped out by French and Raven. But they're not as discrete as I've made them out. There are overlaps between them. They're kind of interconnected and porous. They get a common theme in our unit. Things interconnect in complicated ways. So you can use information, for example, as a form of reward. So informational power can turn into an induced form of power, and a system of rewards can turn into a system of coercion over time, if the threat of the rewards being removed becomes a punishment. So there are lots of overlaps between these forms of power, and one form of power can morph into another. But it's still a useful tool to think about the different ways that power operates. Now, which form of power, authoritative power, is best in terms of having the least problems? Well, one thing that's generally accepted is that it's a combination of referent power and competent power. To be a good boss, you need to be knowledgeable and skilled and be a nice person. So the lesson there, really, for you if you're a university student, is don't just stick your head in a textbook and try to gain knowledge and expertise. You also need to practice your social skills and learn to get along with people, because that is as important as anything to being an effective manager or an effective leader. And of course, it's particularly important if you want to be a psychologist. Now, here's some homework for you. Whether you do it or not may depend on a combination of how useful it is for you to do it and how much authority I have over you to get you to do it. So, maybe you're not going to do it. But have a think about doing this. Think about the types of authority that you're subjected to and which you subject others to. When I reflect on this myself, I figured out that I have access to expert authority because I'm supposed to be an expert as an academic, and the main way I tap into that is through my qualifications, having the title doctor. But that doesn't work on everyone, and that type of authority is waning. The locus of expertise is decentering from professionals, if you hadn't noticed. People are questioning the expertise of professionals. But I don't rely wholly on that form of authority. With students, I kind of have to rely on a bit of legitimate authority as a lecturer, being in the role of a lecturer. So I have that role of setting assignments and deadlines. I also have the authority of being able to reward and punish students. So I have that coercion and induced authority. I reward and punish students through giving good or bad grades. I don't like that sort of power. It doesn't make me feel good about myself. Instead, there's another form of power that I'm quite reliant on, and that's referent power. And that's because, well, it's not because I want people to like me, but it's because I need my students to trust me, and I need to trust my students, because trust is an important part of any relationship, but particularly important in teaching, which is all about the relationship that the teacher has with the learner. And trust is also an important thing when you're thinking about social support. And teaching should be more about social support than about exercising social power, because when teaching becomes about exercising power, that's when it becomes indoctrination. Now, we're going to look at social support in my next video, so that's coming up. So let's leave this one here for now, and yeah, till next time, ta-da.